All right, so Zach, Cameron, Tamu, and poor Mackenzie tore her ACL. Thank you guys for being willing to share today. We're all very excited to hear about your trip. So just for starters, what was like a highlight for you? Just a big highlight overall.
Everyone there was just really great to hang out with, and it was just really amazing to engage with all the Hungarians there.
Yeah, I would second that. It was definitely the people. Just getting to know like all the youth and the adults we got to stay with and the pastors and just members of their congregation. Just getting to know people was a big one. And then also, all the sightseeing we got to do and all the cool like churches we got to see. That was pretty cool.
One of my main ones was staying up really late with the young girls that me and Kenzie were at a camp with. And we didn't understand each other, but we were all dancing one night to Taylor Swift for like 30 minutes. So that was really fun.
I would also agree with that. Sorry I'm up here, but I think the little kids were probably my favorite. I cried when I left the first camp because there was a little boy named Andras, and he was the cutest little thing I've ever seen. But also, all the host parents, they were so kind, and they like would wait on us hand and foot. They drove us everywhere, and they were probably one of my favorites also.
So I'm curious, did you guys have any big culture shocks or something that you weren't expecting? Like, whoa, this is crazy.
In houses, there's typically 2 bathrooms, and one has a toilet and no sink, and then the other one will have a sink and no toilet. So it's very hard to manage if there's someone else in the bathroom. So
In Europe, they usually don't have that cold drinks. Like, their drinks are not very cold. So when we got back to America, everyone wanted like a cold soda.
I would say the fact that the light switches were on the outside of the bathrooms, and if any of you guys had siblings, you know how bad that would have been here in America? Plenty of dark showers, plenty.
I'd say the food. The food wasn't that different, like ingredient-wise, but they would prepare it a lot different than how we would usually prepare it.
Did you guys, how did this trip change the way you see things? Or did it change the way you see things?
I would say it really changed my perspective on what it means to be present somewhere and just pouring out as much as you can, even when you feel like you can't. So it's just like during the second week, we were at a gypsy camp, and none of the kids spoke English. So the fact we couldn't communicate verbally, but just being there and spending time with them and playing games with them and doing crafts with them and just being present and just pouring out and showing that you care about them. The fact that we couldn't even speak, we were still able to build relationships that way, and I feel like that was only through God working through us that we were able to do that.
I would also definitely agree with what Zach said, but also just we are very privileged here. Like, obviously, they weren't a very poor country, or we weren't like in like the hinterlands or anything, but even then it was like their water would taste a little bit different, but then back home I have a choice between Fiji water or like Evian water. And it's like, I don't want to drink tap today, so let's just go buy a bottle of water. And even then, their bottled water would still taste a little different, or it was like bubbly, or just like overall we're very privileged people here.
I would say exactly those words.
And following up what Mackenzie and Cam said, like, it's crazy how like much us as Americans take for granted, like cold drinks, cold drinks, air conditioning, and other things.
How did this trip change your relationship with God?
I think ultimately just to trust in him. A lot of times we would ask Daniel or we'd ask anyone, be like, hey, what are we doing today? Or where are we going? Or like, what time are we going somewhere? And we wouldn't know. We would have a set time. We would go like 3 hours later. And so kind of correlating that to God, it's like, you just got to trust him in all your ways. And you might not know exactly when it's going to happen or exactly where it's going to happen, but at the end of the day, you just need to trust that he is overseeing it all.
I would say God just makes everything work. Like, it's hard to communicate with the Hungarians because of language barrier, but God finds a way to make it work.
I would agree with them both, but like the perspective of more in my situation. I felt called to go like 3 weeks before, and at that time my life savings money was like less than half the cost to go. So I was like, oh, I don't know if this is gonna like work out. And then once like we mentioned it in church, less than a day later, it was all paid for. And then over like the last few weeks before we left, people just kept donating, which was insane. So just like trusting that like he always has a plan, and if he calls you, then it's like gonna happen, and just don't doubt that. And that just became very real, like the phrase of if he calls, he provides.
I would say, I would say like it really like blew my mind about just how much God really cares about us. Because it was my first time out of the country in a long time, and you go to the different airports and you see all these different people going to different places all over the world, and that's just a lot of people. And then you go to Hungary and then you meet these kids at these camps, and then you realize that God seeks a personal relationship with all of us. And there's so many people on there. It's like you hear this number, like there's some billion people, right? That's just a number, but then you get to see just a little glimpse of outside of your hometown, and you see how many people there really are. And you see that God really desires a personal relationship with you so badly that he sent his only son, who is perfect, to bear all the imperfections of the world and the sin of the world, just so that he could personally have a relationship with you. And that was just something God really put on my heart during the trip and after the trip.
Was there something about the trip, or if you had to just choose like one thing, what made it special?
I mean, it kind of ties back into my highlight. I would say definitely the people. The people just made the trip so special because they're so different. And just to hear their stories and their testimonies and just getting to connect with them is just what made it so special to me, just a fellowship.
Yeah, it was crazy how like personable the relationships were without being able to understand each other. Like you'd be like, oh, how am I ever supposed to like have fun or connect to them? But then you see how happy like little kids are when you're just like laughing at whatever they say, and you just assume that it's funny. You just hope that it's not about you. And, but yeah, it was just crazy how personable it is.
I agree with Zach. It's mainly about the people, just how special it is to hang out with them and play games with them.
I agree with everyone. The people was probably the coolest and like most amazing part of the whole trip.
So then lastly is just like a little bonus question. Was there something that you guys learned about yourself that you didn't already know?
I'm more interactive with new people than I really thought I was.
I didn't have an answer in the first one, and I still kind of don't, but I guess patience, like, because you don't understand them, and like we would try to act it out to each other and you still have no idea. So that was really hard, but then eventually it like came around that you could have sort of an idea of what they're saying. So
I would say I was really surprised that like even when I felt like my tank was on E, like I was like completely empty and exhausted, I was still able like to press on and still keep going to talk and make relationships. But I also think like that had little to do with me, but just the grace of God just empowering me to keep going, you know.
I'd agree with Cam on the patience part. Again, like she said, the language barrier was very tough at times because they'd be like offering you food, and you would keep saying no, and they would just finally just bring you a plate of like a ton of food, and you wouldn't be hungry at all, and you're like, thank you, and you would just like eat it because they just put it in front of you, and you just don't know what to do.
Yeah, I heard that joke like, don't get hungry and hungry. Trust me, we weren't. We were not hungry. Not at one point was anyone like, oh, I'm so hungry. If you said the word you're hungry, food just keeps coming. Just keeps coming.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for sharing. It was so fun to hear from you. And let's give them a hand.